Hey, I'm Kaylee. I am a mama to 2.5-year-old twins and a creator of opportunities for our little ones to cultivate kindness and hospitality. One of the ways that we do that is through the art of neighboring. Now, this is a passion of mine, and while we are by no means experts, we've had a lot of experience through trial and error over 7 years of living on the same block with neighbors who have come and gone. The heart behind this channel is to share some of the strategies that have helped our family go about neighboring, and also to demystify some of the effort that we perceive as being part of hospitality. It's definitely not as hard as many of us have been led to believe, and because we've just gotten used to doing life this way, hospitality and neighboring is something that's been incorporated into our lives and therefore into the lives of our 2-year-olds. And I know you're like, wait, a hospitable 2-year-old? And I don't know that they're actually hospitable, but I do know that they love doing life alongside their neighbors. If that type of lifestyle is of interest to you, smash that like button, subscribe, and we'll keep pushing out content about hospitality and neighboring with littles. We're going to examine 5 ways that quarantine during the COVID-19 pandemic changed the art of neighboring, and also ask you all, what did you observe about engaging your neighbors and community during these months of quarantine? Quarantine was this never before seen time where suddenly we were all home and weren't able to go anywhere. We had neighbors who had lost their jobs, others who were essential workers, elderly neighbors who couldn't see their kids, and other families who were balancing working from home with distance learning with their kids. But there was common ground in that we were all worried, we had all been thrown out of our rhythms, and we were all still looking for connection. And it was in this setting that neighboring became absolutely critical. No longer were we able to get by without relationship with the people living around us. Whereas before we may have been able to get by with a quick obligatory salute or greeting, now, the people across the street were the only faces we saw in a week. As a result, we see the first way in which quarantine shifted neighboring. This happened when that obligatory salute transformed into genuine concern for another. Suddenly, there was an openness to investing more than a minute in conversation with each other. We were all more intentional and more receptive to talking about how we were feeling and what we were experiencing. It became an opportunity to be able to lament and grieve together. It wasn't anything formal, I didn't lead anyone in a prayer, but we were able to talk about everything that we were missing and wonder about what things were going to be like on the other end. That, combined with also sharing our joys and the new discoveries that were keeping us busy, like a local nest of baby owls or sourdough starters, brought us to a new level of community and friendship. We even noticed a difference in people walking by our house, or when people invited us into conversation when we were on our walks. The virus was a common enemy that suddenly united us all, and people everywhere had a genuine concern to see how people in their spheres were coping. Because of this genuine concern, we met people whom we otherwise would not have met, and now they're familiar faces around the neighborhood. Predictably, however, when these friendly exchanges didn't pan out was when people chose to walk with masks on. The masks, though an understandable choice, shut off any invitation for interaction. When people walked by our house with masks on, the respectable thing to do was to give them space. So we acknowledged them out of kindness and solidarity, but we honestly reverted back to our obligatory salute. It's the reality of masks as a barrier to human connection. The second way we saw quarantine impact neighboring was in the way we were all a little bit quicker to offer help. It's not that people didn't offer help before. Our neighbors have always been the first responders in case of a dead car battery, last-minute babysitting, and they've always offered care for our home when we've been away, whether that's watering the plants or picking up packages or anything like that. But in these last few weeks, neighboring wasn't just about responding to needs. Neighboring was about anticipating them. Our neighbor's daughter is an ER nurse, so our neighbor has been extra diligent in social distancing because she's still been providing groceries and going to visit her daughter and surprising her and her hospital staff with extra goodies. So picking up on our neighbor's generosity, we were able to bake some goodies to share with the neighbor's daughter. Showing gratitude for our neighbor's daughter meant being there and supporting our own neighbor. And the opportunity for even going about that act of kindness was because of taking the time to listen to our neighbor and what she was up to and how her family was doing. Some neighbors who have even been a little bit harder to get to know offered us 2 rolls of toilet paper back when there was a run on toilet paper and we were worried if we wouldn't actually be able to have some. Other neighbors have offered up an extra dozen eggs or bags of produce when groceries were harder to come by. There was even a morning when 4 of our houses on the block worked together to find the owners of 2 runaway dogs that we had corralled. And along with offering help, the third way quarantine impacted neighboring was in people's willingness to accept help. When quarantine first hit, we wrote "don't worry" notes with our contact info and offered to help do chores or get groceries for the elderly people on our block. And even beyond accepting help, people were willing to go along with some of my more outlandish ideas. With one family, when we were talking about how church had been canceled and he wasn't excited about doing church online, I instinctively offered to organize a weekly hymn sing. And it was a clunky gathering. Picture measly 3-part harmony, kids running everywhere, jumping between hymn verses. But it was the intent behind the gathering that was meaningful to all of us. Another idea for which everybody jumped on board was taking a funny drone photo to commemorate our quarantine. And I made a process video about that adventure linked below. And for quarantine's 4th neighboring influence, simply being outside became an invitation to community. Thankfully, we experienced quarantine in the spring instead of in the winter. I shudder to think of where our society would be had we been kept indoors by quarantine and the weather. Instead, the outside beckoned us with healing fresh air and chances at community. The simple act of being outside, especially in our front yard, created opportunities for connection. Catching people outside, whether it was the young couple gardening or the family with 4 kids playing 500 in the street, or an elderly couple yelling after their dog, it was a repeated invitation to check in and journey alongside each other. It was also a surprising joy to see how welcoming our neighbors have been to us using their space. We can generally be found biking in people's driveways, leaving chalk messages on their sidewalks, just sitting in their grass, or delighting in their tire swings. Now, we are probably more assuming than most, but the freedom to help ourselves to a neighbor's rocks or playing hide and seek under their trees comes with knowing them and having a relationship with them. The often beautiful consequence of this type of hospitality that our neighbors show us is that our being outside in the space that they've provided for and cared for is a sort of invitation for them to come outside and enter into community with us. And we end up enjoying the outside, soaking up vitamin D, and listening to toddler giggles together. Finally, the 5th way in which quarantine changed neighboring was in how freely people were offering and giving encouragement. Even when you'd expect people to be inward focused, concerned about the world and their well-being and what's going to happen in the future, quarantine ended up being a time when our neighbors were picking up on and mentioning and calling out the good in people. We saw neighbors' strength, courage, and perseverance in the face of adversity, and as a block and as a community, we weren't afraid to call that out and see the good in each other. In our own life, different families cheered us up with hand-painted rocks, Mayday flowers in a teacup, or just encouraging words and hand-me-downs. It was beautiful to know that even when we were all stressed and concerned about the future, we weren't afraid to look outward and build one another up. And that concludes our top 5 ways quarantine changed neighboring. Time will tell if these neighboring changes stick around or if they revert to their more isolating ways. What did you notice about neighboring in quarantine? Was your experience as positive? Leave us a comment below or hop on over to Instagram and let us know about your experience there. We'll be making more content about hospitality and neighboring with little kids, especially as we figure out what neighboring is going to look like in this season of life after quarantine. We look forward to journeying alongside you in this effort and art of neighboring.